Hey there, welcome to Bradaros. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. If these tales give you chills, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Night Shift. In the small town of Elkwood, silence reigned supreme once the sun dipped below the horizon. Narrow streets, lined with old oaks and draped in darkness, gave the town a sense of isolation. Few establishments remained open past dusk, and only one place stood out like a beacon, an old, worn-down grocery store on the edge of town. It had been there for as long as anyone could remember, passed down through generations. It was the kind of place that locals didn't talk about much, not because it was bad, but because it was forgettable, except for one thing: the night shift. Anyone who had ever worked the night shift in that store never stayed longer than a few weeks. They all had the same excuse: the hours were tough, but the unspoken truth was far more sinister. Every worker knew that something was wrong about that place after midnight. Claire, a young woman fresh out of college, had recently moved to Elkwood. It was a town like any other, she thought. Quiet, sleepy, perfect for starting over. When she saw the job posting for a night cashier at the grocery store, it seemed like an easy way to earn some extra cash. Little did she know that this simple decision would lead her into the darkest night of her life. Claire showed up for her first shift just before 9 o'clock. The store looked innocuous enough. Its old wooden sign creaked in the cool autumn breeze, and the dim lights inside flickered slightly. As she entered, the familiar smell of cleaning products mixed with stale bread greeted her. The aisles were nearly empty, save for a few last-minute shoppers. "Hey there, you must be Claire," said a gruff voice from behind the counter. A tall, lanky man with a gray beard and tired eyes stepped forward. "I'm Jim, store manager. Welcome to Elkwood Groceries." "Thanks," Claire said, offering a polite smile. "I hope the night shift won't be too quiet." Jim's face hardened slightly. "Quiet? Yeah, you could say that." He motioned toward the back. "Come on, I'll show you around." They walked past the shelves stacked with cans, boxes of cereal, and an assortment of goods that seemed untouched for months. There was something eerie about the place, but Claire shrugged it off, chalking it up to nerves. After all, it was her first night. Jim stopped in front of the back office. "Here's where you'll keep the security footage rolling. The cameras aren't the best, but they'll do. You'll spend most of your time up front at the register, but make sure to check these feeds every once in a while." Claire nodded, glancing at the grainy black and white screens. They displayed every corner of the store, each showing an empty aisle or shelf. Except for one, camera 3, the one pointed toward the storage room, was flickering in and out. She squinted, leaning closer. "Is this one broken?" she asked. Jim hesitated before responding. "Nah, it does that sometimes. Just old equipment, don't worry about it." They finished the brief tour, and by 10 o'clock, Jim was on his way out the door. "Lock up at 6. "You'll be fine," he said with a casual wave before disappearing into the night. As the door closed behind him, Claire was left alone in the empty store. The overhead lights buzzed softly, the aisles eerily still. At first, the shift was uneventful. Claire spent most of her time scanning items for the few late-night stragglers, a couple of whom didn't even bother to make small talk. By 11:30, the store was dead. She leaned on the counter, scrolling through her phone, and let out a long sigh. Easy money, she thought. The faint ding of the doorbell made her look up. A man, tall and thin, walked in. He was wearing an old leather jacket, his eyes shadowed by the brim of a worn-out baseball cap. Something about him unsettled Claire. His presence felt out of place, though she couldn't pinpoint why. "Good evening," she greeted him politely, though he didn't respond. Instead, he wandered down the first aisle, moving slowly between the shelves. Claire watched him from behind the counter, her unease growing with every second. After a few minutes, the man walked to the counter with nothing in his hands. He didn't buy anything, didn't even speak, just stood there for a moment, staring at her. Claire opened her mouth to ask if he needed help, but before she could say anything, the man turned and walked out of the store, the bell above the door giving a final eerie jingle. Claire's heart pounded. She stood still, staring at the door for what felt like ages before shaking her head. "Weird," she muttered. "Maybe just another drifter passing through town." She returned to her routine, but that lingering unease didn't go away. The store felt colder now, the silence more suffocating. By midnight, the place had grown deathly quiet. No more customers, just Claire and the hum of the old fluorescent lights. She remembered Jim's words, and her eyes drifted toward the back office. She figured she'd better check the security cameras. Sitting down at the monitor, she flicked through the feeds. Aisle 1, empty. Aisle 2, nothing. Aisle 3, still clear. She moved on to camera 4, pointed toward the storage room. And there it was again, flickering. Claire leaned in, staring at the screen. The image distorted, static creeping in and out. But in one of those flickers, she saw it, movement. A figure, just for a split second, appeared in the frame, standing near the storage room door. Her pulse quickened. She rewound the footage, but the figure was gone. She tried to convince herself it was a glitch, maybe a reflection from one of the shelves, but deep down, she didn't believe it. That flicker, it wasn't random. Her breath grew shallow as she glanced toward the back of the store. The storage room door was half open, swaying gently as if recently touched. Claire's stomach twisted into knots. She stood up slowly, moving toward the aisle that led to the back. Each step seemed to echo louder than it should. The store was empty, wasn't it? Claire tried to push down the panic rising in her chest. Her hand shook as she reached out to touch the door. Just as she was about to push it fully open, a loud crash came from the storage room, followed by the sound of something heavy scraping against the floor. She gasped and stumbled back, heart hammering in her chest. For a moment, she considered running, leaving the store altogether. But something about the noise, it didn't sound natural, like something had fallen. It was deliberate. Gathering what little courage she had, Claire grabbed a flashlight from under the counter and cautiously pushed the storage room door open. The beam of light swept across the cluttered space, boxes stacked high, old shelves lined with forgotten inventory. Then she saw it. Near the back wall, where the floor met the base of a large freezer unit, the boxes had been knocked over. But that wasn't what made her blood run cold. Something, or someone, had scratched deep, jagged marks into the concrete floor leading to the back wall. The marks were fresh. Claire swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear heavy in her throat. She slowly backed out of the room, locking the door behind her. She didn't know what was going on in that store, but she wasn't going to wait around to find out. The rest of the night dragged on, every creak of the building making her flinch. The strange man in the leather jacket didn't return, but Claire kept seeing him in the corner of her vision, lingering just outside her line of sight. By 5 o'clock, The first rays of sunlight began to peek through the windows, and she felt an overwhelming sense of relief. She had survived her first night. When Jim returned that morning, he took one look at her pale face and asked, "Rough shift?" Claire just nodded, too exhausted to speak. As she gathered her things to leave, Jim's voice stopped her at the door. "I should have warned you," he said quietly, his eyes dark. "Things happen here after midnight. But don't worry, it gets easier, eventually." Claire didn't reply. She just walked out of the store, the weight of his words following her all the way home. Claire didn't return to the store for the next few days. She needed time to process what had happened, to shake off the eerie weight of her first night. When she did return, though, she tried to convince herself it was nothing more than her imagination. Exhaustion, nerves, the stress of a new job, all of it combined had probably made her see things that weren't really there. But when she walked through the doors that evening, the store felt different. Even though it was just after sunset, the air seemed heavier, the aisles darker than she remembered. Jim was there, as usual, nodding to her from behind the counter. He didn't ask her how she was, and she didn't ask him anything either. It was an unspoken agreement that neither of them wanted to address the strange events of that first night. "Another quiet shift, I'm sure," Jim said with a smirk, but there was something off about his tone. Like he was daring her to disagree. Claire forced a smile and headed to the back office. Once again, the cameras flickered in and out, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. She sighed in relief as the clock ticked closer to midnight. But that relief didn't last long. Around midnight, the same strange things began happening again. The flickering lights, the crackling sounds of the camera, the sensation that she wasn't alone in the store. It was all there, just like her first night. Claire did her best to stay calm, telling herself it was just old equipment in a creepy building. But when she checked the security camera again, her stomach dropped. The figure was back. It stood in the same spot, just outside the storage room, barely visible in the flickering light. It didn't move, didn't seem to breathe, just stood there, watching. Claire's heart raced as she stared at the screen. It had to be some kind of trick, maybe a reflection, a glitch in the feed. But deep down, she knew better. She wasn't imagining it. This was real. Suddenly, the figure moved. It turned toward the camera and began walking toward the front of the store. Claire's blood ran cold as she watched the figure disappear from view, only to reappear moments later on the next camera feed. It was coming closer. She wanted to scream, to run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The figure was moving steadily now, its face still obscured by the shadows. Claire's heart pounded in her ears as she watched the figure step into the main aisle. The front door bell rang. Claire gasped and spun around, her eyes darting to the front of the store. There was no one there. The door was still locked, the aisles empty. But the bell, it had rung, as if someone had just walked inside. Her pulse raced as she slowly backed away from the counter, every instinct screaming at her to get out. She glanced at the cameras one more time. The figure was gone. Then, a voice spoke from behind her. "You're not alone here." Claire whirled around, her flashlight clattering to the floor as she searched the darkness. The voice had been soft, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was coming from the storage room. Her hands trembled as she reached for the flashlight, its weak beam cutting through the shadows. She didn't want to go back there. Every part of her wanted to run out the door, but something was pulling her toward the storage room. An unseen force, compelling her to see what was inside. She reached the door, her fingers brushing against the cold metal handle. For a moment, she hesitated. But before she could turn back, the door creaked open on its own. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the security monitor in the corner. The same deep, jagged scratches were etched into the floor, but this time they were fresher, deeper. Something had been dragged across the concrete. Claire took a step forward, her breath shaky. And then she saw it. A small, dusty photograph lay on the floor by the freezer. It looked old, the edges yellowed and frayed. Slowly, Claire picked it up, holding it up to the light. It was a picture of the store, but not the one she knew. The shelves were different, the aisles rearranged. In the center of the photograph stood a group of people, 3 men and a woman. They were all smiling, but their eyes were hollow, empty, like they had seen things no one should ever see. Claire's heart skipped a beat as she recognized one of the men. It was Jim. A sudden gust of cold air blew through the room, knocking over a stack of boxes. Claire jumped, her heart racing. She had to get out of there. As she turned to leave, the freezer door swung open with a loud creak. The sound was deafening in the silence, reverberating off the walls. Claire froze, her eyes wide with terror as the door slowly revealed what was inside. At first, she thought it was a body, but as the light hit the figure, she realized it was something much worse. It was the man from the cameras. His skin was pale, stretched tight over his bones, and his eyes, they were the same hollow, empty eyes as in the photograph. His lips twisted into a grotesque smile as he took a step toward her. "You're not alone here," he whispered again, his voice sending chills down Claire's spine. She screamed, stumbling backward as the man reached for her. Her heart raced, panic taking over as she scrambled to her feet. Without thinking, she ran, sprinting through the aisles and toward the front door. The bell rang again as she burst through the door, the cold night air hitting her like a slap in the face. She didn't stop running until she was far away from the store, her breath coming in ragged gasps. When she finally stopped, she collapsed on the sidewalk, her mind racing. She had to go to the police and to tell someone what she had seen. But when she looked back at the store, it was as if nothing had happened. The lights were still on, the door still closed. It was just a grocery store, like any other. But Claire knew the truth. She wasn't alone in there. And she never would be. The next day, Claire didn't show up for her shift. Jim called, but there was no answer. Days turned into weeks, and soon, the store was back to its usual routine. Another night shift, another new employee. But the photograph remained tucked away in the back of the storage room. And the scratches on the floor never faded. No one ever asked what happened to Claire. The town had its own stories, its own secrets. And as long as the grocery store remained open, there would always be someone to take the night shift. Because in Elkwood, the night shift never ends. The howling from the woods. In the remote town of Ashford, Maine, nestled deep within the dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains, David Parker and his wife Emily arrived in late September. The couple had left behind the cacophony of city life for a more serene existence, hoping the isolation of the countryside would inspire David's archaeological research and Emily's writing. The cabin they had inherited from David's late uncle, Jacob Parker, was a sprawling structure with a history as old as the town itself. The cabin was perched on the edge of an ancient forest, its wooden exterior weathered by years of exposure to the elements. The surrounding garden was overgrown, with vines and thorns creating a nearly impenetrable barrier. Despite its charming appearance, the cabin felt foreboding, as though it held within it secrets waiting to be uncovered. On their first night, the serenity of their new home was shattered by an eerie, mournful howl that seemed to pierce through the silence of the forest. This sound was unlike any animal cry David had heard, a deep, resonant wail that seemed to echo from the very heart of the woods. Emily, usually unflappable, clung to David in fear. They tried to dismiss the sound as the call of some distant creature, but the howl persisted, growing louder and more insistent as the night wore on. The following morning, David set out to explore the surrounding woods, hoping to find the source of the haunting sound. The forest was dense and tangled, the trees so tall and close together that they seemed to form an impenetrable barrier. The air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth, and a deep silence hung over the landscape, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. As David ventured deeper into the forest, he came across a clearing that seemed oddly out of place. In the center stood an ancient stone altar, partially covered by moss and creeping vines. The altar was etched with strange symbols, faces and figures that seemed to writhe and shift in the dim light. David took several photographs and made detailed notes, his curiosity piqued despite an unsettling feeling that grew stronger with each passing moment. When David returned to the cabin, he found Emily waiting anxiously. She had been troubled by a series of nightmares, in which shadowy figures lurked at the edge of her vision, whispering dark secrets. David tried to reassure her that it was likely just the stress of their recent move, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest and the howl were somehow connected to the cabin's dark history. Over the following days, the howling grew more persistent and unnerving. Each night, the mournful cries seemed to draw closer, resonating through the trees with an almost palpable sense of dread. Emily's nightmares grew more vivid and disturbing, filled with visions of dark figures and whispers that seemed to come from within the walls of the cabin. Desperate for answers, David decided to visit the local library, hoping to find some historical context for the unsettling events they had been experiencing. The library was a small, dusty building with creaky wooden floors and shelves lined with ancient books and manuscripts. David spent hours sifting through old newspapers and historical records, searching for any mention of strange occurrences or unexplained phenomena. His research led him to an old journal, buried deep in the archives. The journal belonged to Jonathan Crane, a resident of Ashford from over a century ago. Crane's entries described a series of occult rituals performed in the forest, involving the summoning of dark entities and the making of pacts with malevolent spirits. The howling, Crane wrote, was a sign that these entities were becoming stronger and that those who heard it were in grave danger. Determined to confront the malevolent force haunting them, David and Emily decided to follow the instructions outlined in Crane's journal. They prepared for a ritual meant to dispel the dark entity and prevent further disturbances. Armed with candles, incense, and other ritual components described in the journal, they made their way back to the stone altar in the forest. The forest was eerily quiet as they approached the clearing. The usual sounds of wildlife were conspicuously absent, replaced by an oppressive silence that seemed to weigh heavily on their shoulders. David set up the ritual components with meticulous care, while Emily held the talisman they had found in the cabin, an intricately carved piece of wood inscribed with symbols that matched those on the altar. As they began the incantations, the howling grew louder and more insistent, filling the air with its mournful cry. Shadows twisted and danced around them, and the temperature dropped sharply. David's voice wavered as he recited the ancient words, his breath coming in visible puffs of vapor. Emily struggled to maintain her composure, her hands trembling as she held the talisman aloft. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and the howling reached a deafening crescendo. The sky darkened, and a chilling wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the candles and sending the ritual components scattering. David and Emily fought to stay focused as a dark, shifting mass began to materialize before them. The entity was a swirling vortex of shadow and malice, its form ever-changing and filled with a palpable sense of dread. David and Emily pressed on with the ritual, their voices rising above the cacophony of the howling. The entity's presence was overwhelming, a suffocating force of malevolence that seemed to drain their strength. David chanted the final words of the incantation, his voice filled with a desperate intensity. Emily, her face pale and determined, continued to hold the talisman, its symbols glowing faintly in the darkness. With a final, blinding burst of light, the entity let out one last, anguished scream before vanishing into the night. The clearing fell silent, the oppressive atmosphere lifting as though a great weight had been removed. In the days that followed, David and Emily packed their belongings and prepared to leave the cabin. The howling had ceased, but the memory of their ordeal lingered, casting a long shadow over their remaining days in Ashford. The forest, once a place of beauty and tranquility, had become a symbol of the darkness that lay hidden within its depths. As they left the cabin behind, David and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The forest seemed to hold its breath, its secrets buried beneath the fallen leaves and twisted branches. The cabin stood as a silent witness to their experience, a relic of a past that refused to be forgotten. Years later, the cabin remained abandoned, a dark monument to the terror that had once haunted its walls. The townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of the couple who had faced the howling from the woods and survived. Their story became a cautionary tale, a warning to those who dared to venture too close to the forest's edge. The legend of the howling grew with each passing year, a reminder of the malevolent force that had once lurked in the shadows. As time went by, the story of David and Emily Parker became a central part of Ashford's folklore. The once quiet town saw a rise in visitors intrigued by the tale of the haunted cabin and the mysterious howling from the woods. The cabin, now a decaying ruin, attracted thrill-seekers and amateur ghost hunters, each hoping to experience the supernatural for themselves. Local legends spoke of the howling echoing through the forest during certain times of the year, particularly on the anniversary of David and Emily's departure. Some claimed to hear whispers in the wind or see shadowy figures moving among the trees. The forest became a place of mystery and fear, its dark reputation growing with each passing year. The old journal of Jonathan Crane, now a prized artifact in the local historical society, was often cited by those seeking to understand the forest's dark secrets. Crane's writings, once dismissed as the ramblings of a madman, were now seen as a grim prophecy of the events that had unfolded. Researchers and historians flocked to Ashford, hoping to uncover more about the occult rituals and the dark entities mentioned in the journal. In the mid-1980s, a new family moved into Ashford, drawn by the town's rustic charm and its reputation for mysterious occurrences. The Whitaker family, John, his wife Sarah, and their teenage daughter, Emily, were eager to start a new chapter in their lives. They purchased the old Parker cabin, drawn by its picturesque location and the promise of a peaceful retreat. John Whitaker, a history professor with a fascination for local lore, was intrigued by the stories surrounding the cabin. He spent his free time researching the history of the house and the forest, hoping to uncover the truth behind the legends. Sarah, a writer, was drawn to the cabin's isolation and the creative inspiration it might provide. Their daughter Emily, a high school student with a penchant for the supernatural, was excited by the possibility of encountering ghosts or other paranormal phenomena. As the Whitakers settled into their new home, they began to experience strange occurrences similar to those described by David and Emily Parker. Late at night, Emily would hear the mournful howling from the woods, a sound that seemed to resonate with an otherworldly intensity. Sarah's writing became increasingly dark and unsettling, as if the cabin itself were influencing her creativity. John, determined to uncover the truth, delved deeper into the forest's history, hoping to find answers that had eluded previous residents. One evening, while exploring the forest, John stumbled upon a hidden entrance to a series of underground tunnels. The tunnels, lined with ancient symbols and remnants of past rituals, seemed to stretch deep beneath the forest floor. John's heart raced as he ventured further into the darkness, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the walls. The deeper he went, the more intense the atmosphere became. The tunnels were filled with an oppressive sense of dread, and the air grew colder with each step. John discovered a chamber at the end of the tunnels, its walls covered in intricate carvings and arcane symbols. In the center of the chamber stood an altar similar to the one described in Jonathan Crane's journal. John's excitement was palpable as he examined the altar, noting the similarities between it and the one found by David Parker. However, as he continued his investigation, he felt a growing unease. The howling, once faint and distant, seemed to echo through the tunnels, growing louder and more insistent. The air around him seemed to crackle with an unseen energy, and the temperature dropped sharply. Desperate to understand the significance of the chamber, John consulted the Journal of Jonathan Crane, which he had managed to obtain from the Historical Society. The journal detailed a series of rituals intended to bind and control the dark entities lurking in the forest. John realized that the altar in the chamber was part of a larger, more complex ritual designed to maintain control over the malevolent forces. As the howling reached a fever pitch, John knew that he had to act quickly. He gathered the necessary components for the ritual described in Crane's journal, preparing to perform the rites in an attempt to banish the dark entities once and for all. With his family anxiously awaiting his return, John made his way back to the cabin, determined to end the nightmare that had plagued its previous occupants. The ritual was performed under the light of a full moon, the air thick with tension and the sound of the howling. John's hands trembled as he recited the incantations, his voice barely audible over the cacophony. Sarah and Emily stood by his side, their faces pale with fear but resolute in their support. As John completed the final incantation, a blinding light erupted from the altar, filling the clearing with a brilliant, purifying glow. The howling reached its climax before suddenly ceasing, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The darkness that had pervaded the forest seemed to lift, and the oppressive atmosphere was replaced by a sense of calm. In the aftermath of the ritual, the Whitaker family found that the forest and the cabin were once again at peace. The howling ceased, and the strange occurrences that had plagued them disappeared. The cabin, once a symbol of fear and darkness, became a place of solace and renewal. The Whitakers decided to stay in Ashford, embracing the town's charm and its rich history. John continued his research, now focusing on the positive aspects of the town's past and its cultural heritage. Sarah's writing flourished, inspired by the beauty and tranquility of their surroundings. Emily grew into a strong and independent young woman with a deep appreciation for the mysteries of the world. The legend of the Howling from the Woods became a story of triumph over darkness, a testament to the courage and determination of those who faced their fears and emerged victorious. The forest, once a place of terror, was now a symbol of hope and renewal, its secrets forever etched into the history of Ashford. The mystery of the bottomless lake. In the heart of Washington state, hidden deep within the lush forests of the Pacific Northwest, lay a lake that had baffled and terrified those who came near it. Known locally as the Bottomless Lake, its murky, black waters were as deep as the mysteries that surrounded it. For centuries, the lake had been the subject of local legends and ghost stories, its true nature remaining an enigma despite numerous attempts to uncover its secrets. The year was 1982, when Drive Eleanor Reed, a prominent geologist renowned for her work on unexplained natural phenomena, decided to investigate the lake's perplexing properties. Dr. Reed was driven by a relentless curiosity and a desire to solve the most confounding geological puzzles. Accompanied by her team of experts, she set out to finally unveil the truth behind the bottomless lake. The team comprised Brian Carter, a marine biologist with extensive knowledge of aquatic ecosystems, Lisa Martin, an environmental scientist who specialized in freshwater habitats, and Kevin Brooks, a seasoned diver with a knack for underwater exploration. Together, they hoped to crack the mystery that had eluded so many before them. Upon their arrival, the team was greeted by an oppressive silence that seemed to emanate from the lake itself. The forest surrounding the lake was dense and foreboding, with towering pine trees that blocked out much of the sunlight. The lake's surface, an impenetrable sheet of black, mirrored the overcast sky in an unsettling manner. It was as if the lake were a dark, endless void. As the team set up their camp on the lake's shore, they were struck by an inexplicable sense of unease. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the usual sounds of the forest, birds, rustling leaves, the buzz of insects, seemed eerily absent. Despite the unsettling atmosphere, the team proceeded with their preparations, eager to begin their investigation. Brian took water samples from various points around the lake, noting the unusually high levels of mineral content. Lisa set about cataloging the flora and fauna, though she found an alarming scarcity of aquatic life. Kevin, equipped with state-of-the-art diving gear, prepared for his initial descent into the lake's depths. His goal was to determine the true extent of the lake's depth and to gather data that might explain its mysterious properties. As Kevin submerged, the water around him grew colder and darker. The visibility was poor, and despite his best efforts, he found it impossible to gauge the depth of the lake. The sonar equipment he used was unable to provide clear readings, indicating an abyssal void that defied measurement. Kevin's descent seemed endless, and the further he went, the more he felt an unshakable sense of being drawn downward. After an hour, Kevin emerged from the water, his face pale and his demeanor shaken. "It's like there's no bottom," he said, his voice trembling. "I couldn't reach it. The deeper I went, the more I felt as though I was being pulled down." Dr. Reed and the team exchanged worried glances. The lake's mystery seemed to deepen rather than resolve. That night, around the campfire, the group discussed their findings and the strange sensations they had experienced. The conversation was tinged with a sense of foreboding, and the night's events seemed to amplify the oppressive atmosphere. Lisa reported hearing faint whispers and footsteps around her tent, which she initially dismissed as the sounds of wildlife. But the noises grew louder, accompanied by an inexplicable chill that settled over the campsite. Brian and Kevin experienced similar disturbances, though they were reluctant to voice their concerns, fearing they might seem overly anxious. As the team settled into their camp, the lake's enigmatic presence seemed to grow more intense. The once peaceful setting now felt heavy with an unseen threat, as if the very air around them was charged with something malevolent. Sleep was elusive for everyone, and the feeling of being watched became increasingly palpable. The following morning brought no respite from the unease that had settled over the team. Dr. Reed, determined to continue their investigation, planned another dive into the lake. She was equipped with advanced sonar equipment and additional safety measures to address the issues that had plagued Kevin's previous dive. As Dr. Reed descended into the water, she was struck by the lake's eerie stillness. The darkness seemed to swallow the light from her equipment, and the depth appeared to stretch into an endless void. As she continued her descent, she noticed a faint, ghostly luminescence emanating from the lake bed. The light was dim but distinct, casting an otherworldly glow that seemed to pulse with an unsettling rhythm. Dr. Reed's excitement was tempered by an overwhelming sense of dread. The luminescence grew stronger as she descended further, revealing strange, undulating formations on the lake bed. The patterns seemed almost organic, as if they were alive and shifting beneath the surface. Despite her fascination, Dr. Reed felt a growing sense of unease, as if the lake were a living entity with its own malevolent intent. Suddenly, her sonar equipment began to malfunction, and a powerful current surged around her, making it difficult to maintain her position. The sense of being watched grew more intense, and Dr. Reed struggled to return to the surface. When she finally emerged, her face was ashen, and her hands trembled from the experience. The team gathered around Dr. Reed, anxious to hear her report. "There's something down there," she said, her voice shaking. "I saw a light, something that doesn't belong in a natural lake. It felt like I was being drawn toward it, and the equipment was going haywire." Brian and Lisa listened with growing concern. The lake's mysteries seemed to be deepening rather than unraveling. That night, as the team sat around the campfire, they discussed the implications of Dr. Reed's findings. The luminescence and the malfunctioning equipment only added to the sense of dread that had begun to pervade their investigation. Over the next few days, the team's attempts to study the lake were met with increasing resistance. The lake's behavior became more erratic, and their equipment continued to malfunction without explanation. The strange luminescence persisted, and the team began to experience more intense and disturbing phenomena. One evening, a violent thunderstorm rolled in, drenching the camp and adding to the already oppressive atmosphere. The storm's intensity seemed to amplify the eerie glow of the lake, casting strange reflections and shadows on the water's surface. The wind howled through the trees, and the campfire's light flickered erratically, creating a sense of unease that settled over the team. As the storm raged on, the team noticed a series of unusual occurrences. The sensors they had placed around the lake detected sudden spikes in energy levels, and their recording devices captured strange, otherworldly sounds. The noises were unlike anything they had heard before, low, mournful wails and disembodied whispers that seemed to come from every direction. Kevin, who had been documenting the phenomena, reported seeing shadowy figures at the edge of his vision. The figures appeared to move with the storm, merging with the shadows and creating an unsettling sense of being surrounded by unseen entities. Despite his efforts to capture evidence, the camera's footage was filled with static and distortions. The team's sense of foreboding grew with each passing night. They began to question their decision to continue the investigation, but Dr. Reed remained resolute. She believed that they were on the brink of uncovering something significant, something that could explain the lake's mysterious properties. Determined to uncover the lake's secrets, Dr. Reed and her team reached out to Harold Jensen, a local historian with extensive knowledge of the area's folklore. Harold provided them with a detailed account of the lake's dark history and the ancient rituals performed by early settlers. According to Harold, the bottomless lake was once the site of ritualistic practices carried out by settlers who believed in harnessing the lake's mysterious energy. The rituals involved invoking spirits from the depths of the lake, with the belief that it was a gateway to a realm beyond human comprehension. The settlers had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and the lake had become a place of fear and superstition. Armed with this new information, Dr. Reed and her team decided to conduct a ritualistic experiment of their own, hoping to communicate with the lake's supposed spirits. They set up high-tech sensors and recording devices around the lake and performed a series of rituals that mimicked those described by Harold. The experiment yielded immediate and unsettling results. The sensors detected a significant increase in energy levels, and the recording devices captured strange, otherworldly sounds that matched the descriptions of the spirits. The team members experienced a profound sense of dread and disorientation, as if they were being drawn into the lake's depths. As the investigation reached its climax, Dr. Reed and her team decided to drain the lake using a specially designed pump. The process was laborious and time-consuming, but they were determined to uncover whatever lay beneath the lake's surface. As the water level dropped, they discovered a series of strange, ancient symbols etched into the lake bed, symbols that matched those described in Harold's research. The symbols appeared to form a complex pattern, and as the team deciphered them, they realized that they represented a ritualistic seal designed to contain a powerful, malevolent force. The discovery confirmed the lake's dark history and provided a potential explanation for its enigmatic properties. Despite their findings, the team's relief was short-lived. The lake's energy levels surged dramatically, and a series of violent tremors shook the area. The once still waters began to churn and bubble, and the eerie glow that had haunted them grew more intense. As the team struggled to understand the implications of their discovery, they were faced with a harrowing choice, whether to continue their investigation or to leave before the lake's malevolent force could fully manifest. The sense of impending doom was palpable, and the team members knew that their decision could have far-reaching consequences. The team's final decision was to abandon the investigation and leave the site. As they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, the lake's malevolent energy reached its peak, causing a series of unexplained phenomena that heightened the sense of danger. The lake's surface became a swirling vortex of dark water, and the forest surrounding it was engulfed in an unnatural fog. The team members experienced vivid hallucinations and felt an overwhelming sense of being pursued by unseen entities. Despite the terrifying events, the team managed to escape the lake's grip and return to safety. The bottomless lake remained an enigma, its true nature still shrouded in mystery. The team's investigation had uncovered fragments of the lake's dark history, but had failed to provide a definitive explanation for its inexplicable properties. As they looked back at the lake one last time, the team could only speculate about the forces that lay beneath its surface. The mystery of the bottomless lake remained unresolved, a haunting reminder of the unknown and the dangers that lurk in the shadows. In the weeks following their harrowing experience at the bottomless lake, Dr. Reed and her team returned to their respective homes, each struggling to process the events they had witnessed. Despite their best efforts to move on, the lake's dark energy seemed to linger in their lives, casting long shadows over their daily routines. Dr. Reed, haunted by vivid dreams of swirling darkness and ghostly figures, found herself unable to focus on her work. She became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours poring over the notes and recordings from the investigation. The symbols they had discovered on the lake bed continued to elude her, their meaning seemingly just out of reach. Brian, the marine biologist, experienced recurring nightmares of drowning in an endless abyss. His once thriving career began to falter as he struggled with anxiety and fear. The memories of the lake's eerie glow and the feeling of being pulled downward persisted, affecting his ability to function effectively. Lisa, the environmental scientist, began to experience unexplained physical symptoms. She developed a persistent cough and unexplained rashes, which her doctors were unable to diagnose. The strange sensations she had felt around the lake seemed to have left a lasting impact on her health. Kevin, the diver, was plagued by hallucinations and a sense of being followed. He reported hearing disembodied whispers and seeing shadowy figures in his peripheral vision. Despite his attempts to seek help, he found no relief from the overwhelming sense of dread that had taken hold of him. As each team member struggled with their own personal demons, they remained in touch, sharing their experiences and seeking solace in their shared ordeal. They realized that their investigation had left a mark on them far beyond the physical dangers they had faced at the lake. Several months after their initial investigation, Dr. Reed received a letter from an anonymous sender. The letter contained a series of cryptic symbols that matched those they had discovered on the lake bed. Along with the symbols was a message urging them to return to the lake and complete what they had started. The letter's unsettling tone and the familiarity of the symbols compelled Dr. Reed to reconsider their unfinished business. Despite her reservations and the lingering trauma, she contacted Brian, Lisa, and Kevin, proposing a return to the lake to unravel the remaining mysteries. Reluctantly, the team agreed to reunite and revisit the site. As they arrived at the lake once more, they were struck by how little had changed. The surrounding forest remained as foreboding as ever, and the lake's surface was as dark and still as before. The sense of unease they had felt during their previous visit returned with renewed intensity. Determined to confront the lake's malevolent force, the team set up a more comprehensive investigation, incorporating new technology and methods to understand the lake's energy patterns and origins. They sought to decode the symbols from the letter and perform a more elaborate ritual based on the information provided by Harold Jensen. The ritual involved creating a symbolic representation of the lake's seal using various materials and performing a series of incantations intended to neutralize the malevolent force. As they prepared for the ritual, the team members were plagued by disturbing phenomena, strange sounds, fleeting shadows, and sudden drops in temperature that seemed to respond to their actions. Dr. Reed led the ritual, chanting ancient incantations and placing the symbolic seal at the center of the lake. The process was arduous and emotionally draining, but the team persevered, driven by their desire to resolve the lake's mystery once and for all. As the ritual reached its climax, the lake's surface began to bubble and churn violently. The eerie glow intensified, and a powerful energy surged through the area. The team members struggled to maintain their composure as the lake's malevolent presence seemed to reach its peak. As the ritual concluded, a sudden silence enveloped the lake. The bubbling ceased, and the eerie glow faded, leaving the lake's surface calm and dark once more. The team was exhausted and shaken, but hopeful that their efforts had succeeded in neutralizing the lake's dark energy. However, as they packed up their equipment and prepared to leave, they discovered something unsettling. The symbols they had placed at the lake's center had vanished, leaving only a faint residue on the lake bed. The sense of foreboding that had plagued them throughout the investigation remained, as if the lake's malevolent force had merely retreated rather than being vanquished. Dr. Reed and her team left the site with mixed emotions. They had faced their fears and attempted to confront the lake's dark history, but the lake remained as enigmatic as ever. The mystery of the bottomless lake persisted, leaving unanswered questions and a lingering sense of unease. In the weeks following their second visit, the team members experienced a strange sense of closure. While they had not fully resolved the lake's mystery, they had confronted their fears and attempted to bring peace to the area. The unsettling phenomena they had experienced seemed to subside, and they slowly began to recover from their traumatic ordeal. Dr. Reed returned to her research with a renewed sense of purpose, though the memories of the lake continued to haunt her dreams. Brian, Lisa, and Kevin also found some measure of relief, though they remained wary of the dark forces they had encountered. The bottomless lake remained a place of mystery and intrigue, its secrets hidden beneath its dark waters. The team's investigation had shed light on some aspects of the lake's enigmatic nature, but it had also left them with more questions than answers. As the years passed, the lake became a distant memory, overshadowed by new mysteries and discoveries. Yet, the echoes of the lake's dark presence lingered, a reminder of the unknown and the dangers that lay beneath the surface. The team's experience remained a testament to the enduring power of the unexplained and the allure of the mysteries that lie beyond the boundaries of human understanding. Months turned into years, and the bottomless lake faded from public consciousness. But for Dr. Reed and her team, the lake's legacy remained ever present. They have returned to their normal lives, yet each found themselves drawn back to the lake in their thoughts. The sense of closure they had sought remained elusive. Dr. Reed became increasingly obsessed with understanding the lake's energy. She revisited old journals, reviewed data from the investigation, and reached out to other researchers specializing in unexplained phenomena. Despite her efforts, the lake's secrets remained stubbornly out of reach. Brian, now working as a consultant, couldn't escape the trauma of the lake. His work was marred by recurrent flashbacks and a growing fascination with other unexplained occurrences. He began investigating similar sites, hoping to find patterns or clues that could shed light on the bottomless lake. Lisa relocated to a different part of the country, seeking a fresh start away from the unsettling memories. Yet, she found herself drawn to natural sites with similar ominous qualities. Her health improved, but the experience left a mark on her psyche. Kevin attempted to resume a normal life, but his fear of water persisted. He took up a new profession far from diving and found solace in simpler tasks. Yet, the memories of the lake and its eerie presence lingered, affecting his ability to fully engage with his new life. One day, Dr. Reed received an anonymous package at her research lab. Inside were old photographs and documents related to the bottomless lake. The documents included historical accounts, local legends, and even reports of disappearances dating back centuries. Among the materials was a detailed map of the region, marking several other locations with similar mysterious properties. The documents hinted at an ancient cult that had worshipped entities associated with bottomless pits and dark energies. This revelation suggested that the lake was part of a larger, more sinister network of sites. Dr. Reed's curiosity was piqued. She decided to reassemble her team, now scattered across the country, to investigate these new leads. The team reluctantly agreed, driven by their desire to understand the broader implications of their findings. The team's new expedition took them to a remote region in the Appalachian Mountains, where several locations on the map were marked. The first site was a series of deep caverns rumored to be linked to the ancient cult. The team set up camp and began their investigation, using advanced equipment to analyze the geological and electromagnetic properties of the area. As they explored the caverns, they discovered a network of tunnels and chambers adorned with strange symbols and artifacts. The atmosphere was heavy with a sense of dread, and the team experienced eerie phenomena similar to those at the bottomless lake. The deeper they ventured, the more intense the phenomena became. They found evidence of ritualistic practices and remnants of sacrifices, suggesting that the ancient cult had performed dark ceremonies to appease or harness the entities they worshipped. The parallels to their previous investigation were chilling, reinforcing the notion that the lake was just one part of a larger, malevolent scheme. In one of the caverns, the team stumbled upon a hidden chamber sealed by a complex mechanism. After much effort, they managed to open the chamber, revealing an ancient altar and a series of scrolls detailing the cult's rituals and beliefs. The scrolls described a powerful entity associated with the bottomless pits, capable of manipulating reality and causing inexplicable phenomena. The descriptions matched the experiences the team had encountered at the bottomless lake. Dr. Reed deciphered parts of the scrolls, uncovering a ritual intended to banish the entity from the world. The ritual required specific items and a precise alignment of cosmic forces. The team realized that completing the ritual might be the key to finally resolving the lake's mystery. Armed with the knowledge from the scrolls, the team returned to the bottomless lake. They set up the ritual as described, using the items and performing the incantations with careful precision. The process was fraught with tension and fear as the lake's energy began to react to their efforts. The lake's surface started to bubble and churn violently, and the eerie glow reappeared with a renewed intensity. The team members felt the malevolent presence growing stronger, as if the entity was aware of their intentions. Despite the overwhelming fear, they continued with the ritual, chanting the incantations and making offerings as prescribed by the scrolls. The energy around the lake reached a fever pitch, with strange lights and sounds filling the air. As the ritual reached its climax, the lake's energy surged and then abruptly dissipated. The surface of the lake calmed, and the eerie glow faded, leaving the area in an unnatural stillness. The team members were exhausted but hopeful that they had succeeded in banishing the entity. In the days following the ritual, the lake remained calm and unremarkable. The phenomena that had plagued the team seemed to have subsided, and the area around the lake appeared to have returned to normal. Dr. Reed and her team left the site, feeling a sense of closure and relief. They had faced their fears and confronted the malevolent forces associated with the bottomless lake. The mystery had been partially resolved, but the experience had left them forever changed. Years later, the bottomless lake became a local legend, with tales of its dark history and the mysterious events surrounding it. The team's investigation remained a testament to their bravery and curiosity, but the lake's true nature remained an enigma. Dr. Reed continued her research, applying the lessons learned from the lake to other investigations. Brian, Lisa, and Kevin also found new paths in their lives, shaped by their experiences at the lake. The bottomless lake remained a reminder of the unknown and the dangers that lie beyond human understanding. The team's journey had uncovered fragments of the lake's dark history, but it had also highlighted the enduring mystery of the unexplained. The legacy of the bottomless lake lived on, a haunting reminder of the mysteries that lurk beneath the surface and the courage required to confront them. The lake's story continued to captivate and intrigue, leaving a lasting mark on those who dared to seek its secrets.